The ceasefire is over. Russia is once again attacking Ukrainian hospitals and kindergartens, and Putin has once again started playing the old record about Ukraine's terms of surrender. How did Kyiv respond? Trump's visit to Xi Jinping. It seems that US-China relations are reaching a new level, and this new turn could bring an end to the war in Ukraine. The fearless Putin went out among the people. The Kremlin showed Putin greeting a random passerby, but it turned out to be an employee of the company that manages the villas of Putin and Kabaeva's mother. The deadly Hunter virus has reached Europe, and Russian propaganda is already using it for its own purposes. We'll tell you what's wrong with this information operation. We'll be talking about all this and more in detail right now, so please don't forget to like this episode and let's get started. President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that Russia has resumed attacks on Ukraine with drones, aerial bombs, and airstrikes. He said that Russia itself chose to end the partial silence and reminded that Ukraine will respond in kind. Once again, aerial bombs are being used on the front, more than 80. More than 30 airstrikes have been recorded. Attack drones were shot down in Dnipropetrovsk, Zhytomyr, Mykolaiv, Sumy, Kharkiv, Chernihiv, as well as in Kyiv and the Kyiv region. There is damage to energy facilities, apartment buildings, and a kindergarten. There was also a strike on a regular civilian locomotive on the railway. Russia must end this war, and it is Russia that must take the step toward a real, lasting ceasefire, Zelensky emphasized. According to him, until this happens, sanctions against Moscow are necessary and must continue, work, and be strengthened. It is important that there are no relaxations and that partners do not stand aside but continue to work together for security, justice, and a reliable peace. It's been a while since Russia boasted about having no analogues for its weapons. After the shameful parade, they decided to make up for it. Putin stated that his Oreshnik can be equipped with nuclear warheads. In addition, he once again boasted that work on the Poseidon and Burevestnik systems is in its final stages. However, all this is happening against the backdrop of the Russian army's spring offensive, which was essentially carried out. The occupiers are barely advancing on the front, and we will explain why.
The Russian offensive has stalled. According to analysts from the New York Times, the pace of the occupiers' advance this spring has dropped to its lowest level since 2023.
They are no longer able to launch offensives on the same scale as before. And the result? A result is needed regularly.
The result is these kinds of reckless actions by the Russian command. In the settlement of Rodninskaya, the Russian General Staff concentrated a large assault unit which was supposed to deliver that very result. But it was the Ukrainian armed forces who showed the result, using aerial bombs to level the buildings along with the soldiers.
Naturally, nothing was left of the enemy. The entire detachment, which was likely several dozen people, was buried under the rubble. And this was done precisely thanks to the additional power. So, what kind of bombs are these? Definitely not 125, as I said, but possibly at least 250 kilograms, or even more. Maybe even half a ton.
On one of the main fronts near Sloviansk, Putin's troops also made their mark. There, the assault troops set out on motorcycles, hoping to slip through the kill zone.
Forming a column of 16 motorcycles, Putin's forces moved forward to quickly cross the gray zone and launch an assault. But the drones of the 81st Airmobile Brigade were ready for the attack. Moreover, adjacent units immediately came to their aid. This is the advantage of drone-based defense. You can provide support from afar, there's no need to transport infantry or expose certain positions on the front line. As a result, according to the brigade commander's report, all the motorcycles were destroyed and the soldiers were killed.
At the same time, even a distance of 150 kilometers is no longer safe for the occupiers. Rear area. As analysts report, the Ukrainian armed forces are now focused on destroying Russian reserves and stockpiles up to 150 kilometers deep, which significantly reduces the potential of frontline units.
All these attacks on logistics have bled the Russian army dry and continue to destroy it, power right in the rear. This is one of the main, if not the most important reasons for the failure of Putin's troops' offensive in 2026. By the way,
for many, it was Putin's parade that put the final dot over the I. By May 9th, when not a single piece of equipment appeared on Red Square. And all the achievements of the Russian military-industrial complex could only be shown in a video clip. The question of the greatness of the world's second army answered itself.
Putin said that now. Equipment is badly needed at the front in order to finish the so-called special military operation as soon as possible. That is, even an uninformed viewer of this event gets the impression that there is so little equipment and it is so needed and important that even a few dozen or even fewer units cannot be sent to Red Square.
At the same time, a crucial role in the near-total halt of the Russian offensive was played by a new approach from the Ukrainian command. The new core system of the Ukrainian armed forces, proposed by Minister Fedorov, as well as the long-range sanctions of the head of the unmanned systems forces, Madhyar, have shown phenomenal results both on the battlefield and in the Russian rear.
The unmanned systems forces continue their fundamental struggle against Russian air defense. Why fundamental? Because destroying air defense systems in the frontline zone then allows for relatively free attacks on logistics and various important targets, such as warehouses, headquarters, and military bases.
It seems that even in the Kremlin, it has become clear that by the 5th year of the war, the Russian Federation is only losing momentum. Moscow does not know how to solve this problem. After all, even Putin, respectfully referring to Zelensky as Mr., is now cautiously talking about a ceasefire.
It is quite possible that this decline is being acknowledged in Russia because already, repeatedly, the Institute for the Study of War has noted that Russian units unable to capture even a small Ukrainian village, in other words, we're talking about villages here, not cities, have started publishing AI-generated videos. The Russian side is releasing videos generated by artificial intelligence, supposedly showing Ukrainian soldiers surrendering en masse. And similarly, they post videos claiming that the Russian flag has been raised in certain places, even though, in reality, it simply isn't there.
At the same time, Moscow continues to publicly insist on the withdrawal of the defense forces from the territory of Donbass. By the way, according to Western experts' calculations, if Russia continues its offensive at the current pace, it will take them 30 years to occupy the entire Donetsk region.
The press secretary of Russia's leader Putin, Dmitry Peskov, explained the words of the head of the Russian Federation about the supposed approach of the end of the war against Ukraine. He referred to progress in the peace process and the mediating efforts of the United States. However, as expected, he did not specify any concrete timelines. According to Peskov, Putin is ready to meet with Zelensky for negotiations in Moscow at any time. He added that a meeting outside the Russian capital would only make sense for finalizing the process of ending the war, and that work still needs to be done on this. The press secretary also stated that the so-called special military operation would stop at any moment as soon as the necessary decisions are made in Kiev, decisions they are well aware of. Well, Putin also knows perfectly well what decisions should be made in Moscow. What is really behind the loud statements of the bunker dictator? And how does the Kremlin plan to wind down the so-called special military operation? We explain in detail in this report.
The war needs to be ended, and it is possible to meet with Mr. Zelensky. An unexpected metamorphosis has happened to Putin.
Everything is going according to plan.
We don't know if the bunker was affected by Ukraine strikes deep inside Russia, or maybe he just overheated on Red Square on May 9th. But he started talking about ending the war, and soon at that. I
think that things are moving toward an end.
Of course, not without the usual. He couldn't do without the usual. They wanted to destroy Russia, but now Putin has even found some smart people in the West.
There are certainly smart people there.
And most importantly, Zelensky is now Mr., and Putin is ready to meet with him not only in Moscow.
The Ukrainian side, Mr. Zelensky, is ready to hold a personal meeting. Yes, I have heard that. But this is not the first time we've heard it. Well, what can I say in this regard? We've never refused. I have not refused. I'm not the one proposing this meeting. But if someone is proposing it, by all means, let the one who wants to meet come. Let them come to Moscow and we will meet. We could also meet in a third country, but only in one case. When final agreements are reached on a peace treaty.
Of course, the ultimatums remain, but it's hard not to notice the changes. But why did Putin suddenly decide to change something?
Putin probably hasn't developed any more affection for Zelensky lately, quite the opposite, in fact. Well, generally speaking, it's clear that Russia is suffering defeats on all fronts and that Russia has not managed to handle this war. Accordingly, there is now an awareness and acknowledgement of all this. And that's why, at this point, the only thing Russia is really trying to do is to save face. And
all of this is happening against the backdrop of the DCE Center's publication of the Kremlin's plan for ending the war, along with instructions on how to sell this not-quite victory to the Russian people.
This is a victory over international imperialism and globalism, not over Ukrainian nationalism, but over the United West. In
Kremlin talking heads have already started working according to the new guidelines.
look, the channel of Sergei Markov, the great political scientist, I used to sit with him in neighboring offices at Channel 1. So Russia has already won. This is already a victory. We fought against all the Western countries Russia is not broken, and so on, similar talking points. Then it continues, almost like a carbon copy. The Channel 2 majors, one of the largest Z publics, they say it's close to the Ministry of Defense and to Belousov, which means also to Katerina Tikhonova, Putin's daughter. So Russia also thwarted the plans to destroy the country, which means it has already won strategically. In
the presentation of the image of victory, the Kremlin promises a bright future for Mother Russia. They also predict a world where all enemies are either destroyed or powerless.
After the war ends, Ukraine will not exist anyway. The country will disappear within 10 to 15 years. The European Union has proven its helplessness and is stagnating. Most of the world supported Russia, and only traitors left the country. In such a situation, one must know when to stop in time. Now airports will operate again, and sanctions will be lifted. Russian weapons will be exported, since they have proven their reliability.
Interestingly, the Kremlin understands that not everyone will swallow such a victory, so they decided to label anyone who downplays these achievements as anti-patriots of Russia. And true patriots are being encouraged to focus on the following.
We present the war not as something unfinished, but as key objectives that have been achieved. The key objectives were as follows. Russia, again, I'm saying this as I read from this plan, these are not my own words. Russia saved Donbass, Russia secured a land corridor to Crimea, and seized important territories and resources. And it doesn't matter what is actually happening in those territories. For example, agricultural activity, there is now impossible, strengthened its sovereignty, and most importantly, as they write, this is the cherry on top, Russia withstood a war against the collective West made up of 50 countries that fought against dear Russia. But
the end of the war, which Putin suddenly started talking about, and which the more liberal faction of the Kremlin dreams of, is just one possible scenario. After all, alongside the camp in the Kremlin that wants to end the war as soon as possible, there are also those who want to keep fighting to the very end.
During the same press conference where Putin spoke about ending the special military operation, he also supported the pro-war camp.
The national armed forces and military personnel must dedicate their full strategic attention and resources toward achieving a decisive and final reckoning with the enemy forces as a fundamental part of the ongoing and critical special military operation currently being conducted.
Let's be honest, there's nothing peaceful about this attitude.
When a country is run by an old schizophrenic, it's pretty hard to predict anything with 100% certainty because honestly, who knows what might get into his head.
However, there is also a third option. All these statements could be a bluff. Analysts at the Institute for the Study of War are convinced that, in reality, no one in the Kremlin wants peace. Supposedly, Putin and his cronies are playing at peace to ease the tension caused by Ukraine's long-range strikes on Russia and other problems.
The Kremlin is likely trying to appease its domestic audience, which is increasingly feeling the effects of more than 4 years of war, and Russia's inability to repel Ukraine's long-range strikes.
Therefore, all the current talk about peace in the Kremlin should be seen not as a change of course, but as yet another stage in their game. Because while some Kremlin factions are scripting a victory, others are once again calling to finish off their enemies.
The largest Russian digital platforms have begun massively labeling children's books in accordance with the law on the prohibition of drug propaganda. In particular, on the Litres and Ozon platforms, such labels have appeared on books like Gina the Crocodile and Cheburashka, The Three Little Pigs, Old Man Hotabich, and The Wizard of the Emerald City. And of course, the harmful Western books like Treasure Island, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, and Peter Pan were not spared either. All that's left for edification is a public burning. To organize a bonfire, you're on the right path, comrades. Well, although what path is there outside the Moscow Ring Road, as there was nothing, so there still is nothing. Just directions. But budget funds are going directly to the war against Ukraine. Russians are already starting to realize that something is going wrong, but will they dare to stage a real revolt and overthrow the authorities? Let's watch.
While Russian propaganda keeps droning on about the greatness of a superpower, Russia itself is literally drowning in its own problems. Then right now we're not even talking about the front lines.
There are pallets laid out in the courtyard. Starting from the entrance, it's a mess. This is how people have to walk. The flower bed is flooded, and there's a girl covering her nose because the smell is unbearable.
This is the city of Engels in the Saratov region. It is from here that Russian bombers regularly take off to launch missiles at Ukrainian cities at night. Now the city is drowning in its own sewage.
The children's playground, the wooden benches, and the small sandboxes are all still holding out quite well.
A major accident at the main sewer collector has turned the streets into stinking rivers and fecal shores. Yards, basements, and the first floors of residential buildings are flooded with sewage. And
this is how we have to walk our little children to kindergarten. It's impossible to get to school at all. I mean, what kind of conditions are these?
The water keeps rising. Here is the very first step, and as you can see, it has almost reached that first step already. I'll try to go outside now. This is what the situation looks like in the yard. Here are my flowers blooming. There you go. Everything is flooded.
more than 200,000 people were left without water right during the May holidays. The authorities declared a state of emergency, and Rospotrebnadzor recommended that Russians drink only bottled or boiled water. As usual, at first the utility services tried to pretend that everything was under control, but after heavy rains, the system finally collapsed. Now the utility workers are asking residents not to use toilets and sinks unless absolutely necessary, because without water pressure, waste just accumulates in the pipes.
As I wrote yesterday, I really feel like I need to poop, but I can't.
Meanwhile, even without the help of the Ukrainian armed forces, Russia's infrastructure continues to fall apart. This time, one of Russia's largest metallurgical plants, Severstal in Cherepovets, caught fire. The fire covered an area of about 300 square meters, and thick columns of smoke could be seen from almost every district of the city. However, as usual, the Russian authorities declared that there was no threat and the situation was under control. In fact, barrels of benzene and industrial oils were burning. Meanwhile, in Tuapse, the smell of stability can still be felt to this day.
One should not assume that when a fire ends, its impact on people and nature also ends. No, it continues because all these toxic substances keep migrating through the environment. And in one way or another, they will end up in the human body.
After the fire, elevated concentrations of benzene continue to be detected in the air. Local residents are advised not to open their windows, to go outside less often, to wear masks, to rinse their eyes, and even to avoid using contact lenses.
A slight exceedance of the hygienic standards for the maximum one-time concentration of benzene in the air has been recorded. The level of pollution is generally lower than it was during the extinguishing of the previous large-scale fire, which started on the night of April 20th due to a drone attack. Operational headquarters, Krasnodar Krai. In
reality, the situation poses a threat to people's health, and evacuation is required in the city. In
this case, there is an extremely large amount of such substances. They are especially dangerous for those who have diseases related to the respiratory system. For example, bronchitis or asthma, and benzene, a first-class carcinogen. It can trigger some type of cancer, for example, leukemia.
A similar situation is developing today in other Russian regions as well. In the Perm region, after a fire at an industrial site, Rospotrebnadzor also did not detect any exceedances, even though the same kind of oil rain fell there as in Tuapse. In Uzievsk, they have their own kind of environmental stability. For years, locals have complained about the reddish dust settling on the snow near the brick and expanded clay factory. Previous inspections have already recorded this, an excess of harmful substances. But apparently, Putin's inner circle doesn't care much about this. After all, they're not the ones breathing this air. In all three cases, the Russian authorities keep repeating tirelessly, the situation is under control and there is no threat to the population. Although local residents complain about a pungent smell, breathing problems, polluted air, and consequences that could affect people's health for a long time to come. I
just recently said we will press them to the end. There is reason to believe that we will finish them off.
And while the Kremlin spends billions on war and missiles, its own cities are drowning in filth, suffocating from benzene, and living next to failing infrastructure. So the Putin system knows how to kill its own citizens not only in a shameful war, but also with its so-called stability.
The Kremlin has published a video of Putin meeting with his former schoolteacher. During this meeting, he greets someone, supposedly a random passerby. He shakes his hand, asks about the weather and his impressions of Moscow. An agency analysis showed that the role of the random passerby was played by Alexander Bazani, who previously worked for the company managing Putin's villas and those of the mother of his companion, Alina Kabaeva. Well, the show Putin mingles with the people and isn't afraid of anyone was, as always, a success. Putin needed this theater a week later, after one of the European intelligence agencies released a report about increased security measures around the president. It was reported that he had even stopped visiting his residences in the Moscow region and in Valdai. While Putin is meeting with his former teacher and his staff, Trump is getting ready to visit Xi Jinping. It seems that relations between the US and China are reaching a new level. And this new turn could bring an end to the war in Ukraine. The details are in our report.
Trump is flying to China. A difficult meeting lies ahead.
President Trump enters these negotiations in a very weakened position.
Previously, this visit was cancelled due to the war with Iran. Xi's government was not ready for a meeting until the conflict was resolved. China has officially announced the date of Donald Trump's visit to China, from May 13th to 15th.
The leaders of the world's two largest economies will hold their first face-to-face talks in more than 6 months, trying to stabilize relations strained by trade, the war between the US and Israel with Iran, and other areas of disagreement.
This is Trump's first visit to China in the past 8 years. The last time an American leader was in China was back in 2017, during Trump's first presidential term. The previous US President, Joe Biden, did not visit China. But Trump and Xi met in the fall of 2025 in South Korea on the sidelines of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. After that, they only held phone conversations.
Trump needs to show that he is not afraid of China. He has issued warnings repeatedly, but he has not followed through on them. For example, an additional 50% tariff on arms supplies to Iran during the war. Almost certainly China did this, and no tariffs were imposed. The Chinese have a very arrogant mentality, and I think it will be quite difficult to deal with them.
Trump will arrive in China on Wednesday. On Thursday, there will be a meeting with Xi Jinping, after which the leaders will visit the Temple of Heaven and attend a state banquet. In the evening, on Friday, there will be a working lunch, after which Trump will head back to the United States. Yes. It is expected that the war with Iran will take an important place in the negotiations.
China obviously plays an important role as it provides Iran with diplomatic support, propaganda support, economic support, target information, and weapons. Virtually everything except combat personnel.
The war in the Middle East has had a significant impact on global energy markets and has intensified disputes between the US and China.
If China is interested in the event that the current geopolitical situation somehow reaches a complete standstill, it will be absolutely necessary to provide Trump with a highly compelling and significant incentive in exchange. So, for example, a trade-off, freezing the situation in Iran in exchange for freezing the situation in Ukraine. Why not?
Another crucial issue that Trump and Xi Jinping will discuss is the war in Ukraine.
Do you want China to put pressure on Russia to end the war?
I would like China to help us with the issue regarding Russia. We have imposed very serious sanctions against Russia. I think the sanctions really bite. They are very tough. But I would like China to help us. As you know, I have a very good relationship with Chairman Xi. Truly good ones.
Putin's aggression will definitely be a subject of discussion, even if information about it does not leave the negotiating room.
The war in Ukraine remains a place that consumes an enormous amount of resources. Trump currently lacks the capacity to manufacture and supply all the military equipment and weaponry required for all the wars that are currently taking place across the globe. And that is exactly why, of course, he would like the situation here to finally start becoming more stable and predictable.
Experts are certain that the bunker villain has worn out his welcome with both leaders. After all, both Trump and Xi love money, and money loves silence. According to sources close to the negotiations, the parties will analyze Russia's economic situation and its future place in the world. The Kremlin knows that Beijing could decide everything for them, which is why on May 9th, Putin was so frantically giving comments to journalists.
By the end of the day, on May 9th, the geopolitical situation began to deteriorate sharply for Putin. He had to urgently organize this very briefing. At which, attention, what does he announce? Let's focus on this separately. He suddenly announces that the war is close to ending.
Suddenly, for the first time, he declares that he is ready to meet, and for the first time mentions the name of the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, in a neutral country. And he announces his upcoming visit to China, which, as far as I know, had not been mentioned anywhere before.
Military, diplomatic, and political fiascos have led Putin to the point where he will have to completely agree to everything. The Kremlin dictator has begun to realize that he is clearly not on the same level as the world's powerful, and no one is planning to take him along to play in the big geopolitical sandbox. Russia was never a serious global player, but after the start of the war in Ukraine, it has become a pariah altogether. The economy is ruined, the army is discredited. No one takes such weaklings seriously.
This deep-seated fear, of course, is the strongest one for him to face, primarily because he witnessed firsthand how the United States government orchestrated a complex deal in Venezuela, where they simply decided to shift their support and change the political landscape overnight. Maduro's closest circle betrayed him and sent him to an American prison. And on the other hand, he saw how Khamenei was eliminated.
In addition, the US president will try to put pressure on Xi Jinping to persuade him to stop supporting Iran and Russia, including providing them with dual-use components and the potential export of weapons.
This situation, when Trump, I would say, became disillusioned with a path that was not so possible, partner, he becomes interested in such a potential partner. China.
Washington remains concerned about the assistance that China provides to Tehran in exchange for Iranian oil.
As for Iran itself, it's about oil. China receives between 45 and 50% of its imported oil through the Strait. By the way, it also does not receive Venezuelan oil at a discount. Therefore, this has a significant impact on certain sectors of the Chinese economy.
In addition, the parties will discuss economic and trade issues as well as the restrictions in the technological sphere imposed by Washington.
Yes, we need Chinese rare earth elements. We need their pharmaceutical products. But for the Chinese, I think access to American consumers is extremely important. Therefore, the issue of tariffs will be important.
Obviously, for China, the American market is one of the largest. For America as well, trade relations with China are quite important because China really does a lot of what it can do. Therefore, of course, economic interests are always a priority for Trump.
China introduced retaliatory measures regarding rare earth elements, which play an important role in global supply chains. In 2025, the leaders had already agreed to suspend the trade war.
The Trump administration considers China the most serious geopolitical competitor, and I would even say adversary. Keep your friends close, but your enemies even closer. Therefore, this will rather be an agreement with a potential enemy.
The Chinese yuan has effectively pegged itself to the American currency, so each side will benefit from this meeting. But not Putin, who tried to sit on two chairs at once. His song is already sung.
A deadly virus has reached Europe, and Russian propaganda is already using the hantavirus for its own interests. We will explain what's wrong with this and with the dog. In the meantime, don't forget to like this episode and subscribe to the Ukraine YouTube channel. Today,
losses in the armed forces will not be from combat but from the hantavirus, a deadly virus in the AFU, but commanders refuse to treat their soldiers. Such headlines have filled Russian news feeds and public pages. The main message: the Ukrainian army is suffering losses due to a new epidemic.
Hantavirus is spreading en masse in the Kharkiv, Sumy and Lviv regions. Because of it, Ukrainian units in the Kharkiv and Sumy regions are suffering non-combat losses. Notably, Ukrainian commanders forbid providing medical assistance to sick servicemen, believing that they are trying to avoid participating in combat operations.
According to information coming from the combat zone, foreign mercenaries have already dubbed the hantavirus the plague, and soldiers complain about chronic health problems and high mortality from diseases in the trenches.
On May 7th, the Kremlin propaganda agencies TASS and RIA published a report about an outbreak of hantavirus, which allegedly spread among Ukrainian soldiers. Then, this news was picked up by other news feeds, to the point that alarming reports began to appear in Russian social media groups connected to border regions.
Voronezh region is under threat of hantavirus spread. Due to the outbreak in Ukraine, the virus could spread to Russia's border regions, including the Voronezh region.
3 days before the Kremlin publications, there was actually a high-profile case involving hantavirus recorded in the world. On May 4th, an outbreak of infections was recorded on board the cruise liner Hondius, which was traveling from Argentina to Cape Verde. Of the 8 confirmed cases, 3 patients died. A quarantine lasting up to 8 weeks was declared on the ship. On May 10th, the liner arrived in Tenerife, where the remaining passengers were evacuated. This concerns the Andes strain. It is the only type of hantavirus for which human-to-human transmission has been documented.